Design shapes the way you live. I'm Nico, an interior design expert focused on the connection between home and well-being. Using science, design, and professional expertise, I'll help you shape a space that elevates your mindset and enhances your well-being. Let's create space for better living, starting now. Welcome back to Your Home by Design. I'm Nico, and today we're pulling up a chair to the dining table, not just in your home, but around the world. We all have habits around how we eat, what time we sit down, what's on our plates, how long we linger, even what the room feels like. But here's the question I want to ask you. What if you could design your table style the way you design your home? Imagine borrowing Spain's love for late night lingering, Japan's beautiful rituals, France's elegance and layered table settings, India's generous thali spreads, and Scandinavia's light-filled simplicity. What would happen if you could mix and match the best parts of each culture and build a dining experience that matches the lifestyle you want? That's what this episode is all about. We're going to travel through the way different countries dine, look at the design of the spaces themselves, the tables, the lighting, the atmosphere, and tie it all back to the neuroscience of how meals impact our mood, our health, and our sense of connection. By the end, you'll not only feel inspired to see your dining table differently, but you'll have practical ideas you can bring into your own home. Whether that's adding one small ritual, rethinking your dinnerware, or even shifting the way you light your dining space. So let's explore how the world dines, and more importantly, how you might design your own style at the table. Dining is one of those things. When we sit down for a meal, we often just get busy. We rush it. It's kind of one of these things that it's an afterthought. Sometimes it's like, we know we need to eat, and therefore this needs to get done before we can move on to do whatever we need to do. It's become sort of this rushed event. I know I speak with some people who are like, oh, I never actually sit down and have a proper meal anymore. It's always either on the go, or we're eating out a lot, or we're rushing off here or there. I'm getting home from work late. And it's one of these things that dining, has become a rushed event. I think for a lot of us, we could agree that it's not as sort of sacred or as important as perhaps it should be. Dining is not just about food. It's about design. It's about neuroscience. It's about culture. It's about our well-being. Our health relies on what we eat and how we eat it. And it's funny because we do often put it as secondary, that the act of sitting down together, the act of preparing a meal and what we're putting into that meal can become secondary because we're rushing. For us, and in our household, we do a movie night, usually every Friday night, where we come together as a family, we order something in, and we sit and we watch a movie together. And I was sort of laughing because I'm like, that experience when we're actually sitting down and eating together while we're watching a movie, it often is really rushed, and posture is not great while we're eating. We've sort of started the movie and then we stop it when the food arrives, and we quickly dish out and we quickly rush back to get going on the movie again. And I was thinking how fun it is when you do a movie night to have things like popcorn and make it really special, and how we've gotten to a point where we don't even really have popcorn or have time for popcorn because we're eating our meal during the movie. So by the time we're done dinner, no one really feels like anything else. We're still full from dinner anyway. And I'm like, what we need to do is get back to that eating our dinner before and then putting the movie on and creating that really special moment, and then making sure that our meal that we're eating is actually something that we're sitting down together as a family, especially at the end of the week, just to reconnect and take time to eat and catch up with one another. Also, while I was writing this episode, I came across these ads for TV dinners because I was thinking about how our dinner styles have changed, and at what point did it really start to change, especially in North America, shifted. And so I came across these TV dinners because I thought, just with our whole movie eating and ordering in, we are essentially eating in front of the TV. And I think a lot of people are in that that habit of eating dinner while they're watching something. I came across these ads and they are so funny because they're for, I guess at the time there was a handful of companies that were making these TV dinners. And so they were selling them. Of course, this is in the 50s and the 60s. Advertising was very much geared towards women. So there was one ad where this woman it looks like she's just come in from shopping. She's got a grocery bag in hand and she's pulling out one of these TV dinners and she's sort of dressed formal. She's got these black little gloves and a pink little purse. And then she's got this shopping bag. It looks like, now it would be a vintage hat box. And then in the background, her husband is sitting at the table with this newspaper. And then you can see this clock on the wall. And she's looking at her watch as she's pulling this TV tray out of her bag. And the ad says, "I'm late, but dinner won't be." And then there was another one. It's a couple and you've got the man leaning up against this ladder holding a paintbrush and he's painting the wall, but he's looking at this woman who's holding up the TV dinner to him. And she's got paint swatches in her hand, sort of resting on her hip. And so you can see that only half the wall is painted. And then the ad says, when you're painted into a corner at dinner time, and it's all sort of framed as like, it's just as good as home cooked meals. So the advertising was very much about time, right? Like, how can you save time? How can you keep painting so you don't have to stop and cook dinner? How can you shop and get home late, but still have a great dinner on the table? And I think it was this idea of like, what can we continue doing so that we don't have to stop and cook? Yet cooking itself and dining itself, like I said, is just so much more than just the act of eating. There's so much more involved. And as we'll see, different parts of the world do it differently. And there's different etiquette and there's different styles of food and different ways of designing a dining room. And it's all really interesting and very important for us to to enjoy dinner and to enjoy the act of dining and sharing meals together. The way we set up our table and then the style of eating and the look of the dining room itself is so connected to our experiences, to where we were raised, where we were born, where we currently live, and just influences in our lives. Maybe there's people in our lives that did things a certain way and we've adapted that to our own. How we dine, how we eat, how we set the table up really does reflect who we are and in a lot of ways really what we value. I remember I had clients who I was designing their dining room. We were looking at tables and chairs and they kept saying, we don't want a really big table and we don't want a lot of chairs because we don't entertain and we really don't want to entertain. Not only are we not going to use them, but we actually don't want to encourage people to think that we're going to have them over and that they should come over to eat. And I was trying to explain to them, regardless, we do have to fill the space. Like the space is the space and it is the size that it is. And we can go as small as possible, but it has to be balanced and proportionate in that space. We did end up going with a smaller table and not as many chairs as what we could have done, but it still looked balanced. So maybe not as small as what they were hoping, but it was an open plan. So you really had to scale it appropriately. But, for them, they did value connection and getting together with people, but they just preferred to do that outside of the home. They also travel a lot, so they're eating all over the world and they love trying different restaurants. So that was one of their values, was sharing meals with family and friends outside of the home. But then there's those people who want to entertain, they want to have people over, but they don't because their table is not set up properly. It's a catch-all for things. It's sort of like that dumping ground. And that happens often, especially if you have small kids. Sometimes those areas can become a place where crafts happen. And then it's set up for that most of the time instead of for what it should be used for, which is actually getting together and eating as a family. And we really need to look at our habits around the table, right? We need to look at what are we doing that's impacting how we could use our table. Why are we not sitting down as a family? Why are we not having people over? Why are we not just even enjoying a meal by ourselves in a proper way? So we need to look at those habits that are stopping that from happening and make sure that they really align with what we want. And another thing to consider is if you live in a warmer climate, you may have year-round outdoor dining. So therefore, having an indoor space that's dedicated to a dining experience may not be something you need. So therefore, your outdoor experience can actually be designed in a way that meets your needs and reinforces your values. And just something to keep in mind is the design of outdoor spaces can still feel indoors. If you want a sense of formality, then you can still do that outdoors. If you want it to feel very relaxed, you can do that outdoors. Even your lighting and your upholstery and the style of your chairs. I mean, it's amazing how many beautiful options there are for outdoor dining that actually are meant to be outdoors. They can withstand the sun or the temperature changes or rain or whatever. So in our house, it's important to eat healthy. We have a lot of our food is made from scratch, and we love really fresh ingredients. And I always laugh because if my kids have friends over, and snack time is always really challenging because if you were to open my cupboards, you would say, okay, there's really nothing to eat. Yet if you were to actually open, another cupboard, you would see, well, it's just the ingredients for what you need. So you're not going to come over to my house and find a box of cookies in my cupboard, unless maybe we are having guests and I've decided to get a few additional things just to accommodate other people. But typically, we don't have a box of cookies in our cupboard. If you look in my pantry, you'll see there are everything you need to bake cookies, which, it's just, and the reality is we don't always have cookies. There are times where the kids have them and I bake them, and there's times where I don't have time to do that. So we do prioritize eating healthy. That is something we do in our household. We love food and eating healthy and sitting down as a family. I would say we have the style of eating we have is very much a reflection of our families and the fact that we love sitting down and enjoying each other's company. I always remember my husband's grandma. She was Ukrainian, and she used to make the most amazing cabbage rolls. And her style, she would have the family over to her house, and she'd put out all this food for us, and it was a communal style of eating, and her cabbage rolls were so delicious. And I just remember I have such fond memories. We shared a garden with her for a time where we grew vegetables, and I remember being in that garden with her and hearing her stories of the Ukraine and everything that she had gone through as a child when she had to leave the country, and then food and vegetables and her tricks and how to grow certain things. Every time I cook, say, a curry, I think of a colleague of mine who I worked with years and years ago, and her background is Fijian Indian, and she shared with me some amazing recipes that she had got from her mom and that she had been making for her family. And I still think about her when I'm sauteing my spices and my onion in the oil, and just the aromas of that. Food can really impact our health, right? I mean, obviously what we eat has such a huge impact on our health, but so does the style of cooking and also the memories, right? The memories we cherish around food and around sharing food with one another. I recently read a study that said watching TV during family meals was actually connected to poor diet in kids. And so we have to think about where we're eating our food and how we're doing that. I also read a study about plate design, and this was really interesting, but it suggested that if your plate had a rim around it, then your serving size may be perceived as being larger. So if you have one plate that has a wide rim around it versus another plate that has a really narrow rim or no rim at all, you might perceive your food to be larger on the plate with the rim and your portion to be smaller on the plate without a rim. And I share this because I want you to see that it's not always just about being pretty and about looking great, right? When we're buying things for our dining spaces, things like plates, right? Our brains literally interpret portion size, flavor intensity, and based on plate design. So just think of it. That's a detail, and it potentially the rim on your plate could impact how large of a portion you have on your plate. And from a design perspective, like if you have a farm table that has nicks and dents, and when you run your fingers over it, you can feel the ridges of the table. It's rough, it's textured, versus if you have more of a formal table where you run your hand across that table and it feels so smooth. It's high gloss, it's polished, and you almost feel like you could see every little crumb that's left on that table. Those two very simple things are going to cause a visceral reaction. And just something as simple as the texture on your dining table will really inform how you use the space and how you feel while you use it. You can imagine pulling up a chair and resting your hands on a really formal dining table. The way you approach that is going to be different. If you were holding a mug with a hot beverage, you're probably not going to put the mug down straight down on the table with the high gloss. You're going to be apprehensive. You're going to feel like, oh, you probably shouldn't do that. This table is very precious. Versus if you're sitting down at a farm table that's got nicks and dents, it might not even be a thought. You might just plunk your mug down and not worry. So texture and the look of a table is really going to inform how you're responding to that space. And that's what I want to emphasize is the importance of getting like acquainted or reacquainted with the idea of food and eating as an experience, not just through taste and, and that active community and lived and shared experience, but also a visual and aesthetic experience. And when you can reverse engineer that, you can control the outcome, right? So if you want health, if that's something that's important to you, that's a value of yours, there are certain things you can do around eating and where you sit and set up your table and all of those things that will allow you to make those healthy choices, from how you prepare the food, how and where you are eating, how long you linger, and what you see and focus on aesthetically while you eat. If you want connection and experience, like how you set up the space, the lighting, the textures, the time that you allow between food. Maybe you make deliberate choices to delay when the food arrives to the plate. You call everyone comes and sits down, and then you wait a little bit to actually bring the food and put it on the table. Or you have candles and flowers and music. And even the weight of your cutlery has an impact. If it's a heavier weight, it feels more substantial. So if you want the experience to be memorable and feel important, consider using heavier cutlery. Like there's just little tweaks that you can do that are going to elevate the experience. And some people feel really, really comfortable in a more formal setting, and other people are more comfortable in a relaxed, casual setting. And I just want to emphasize that if you're someone who has guests or wants to have guests, you kind of have to design your space in how you use it, right? It has to be authentic to you. And everyone has their preferences, and that's okay. Everyone has their comfort levels. You can't design your space to appease everyone. You have to do it for what you love and what you value and the outcomes that you really want. And this is something that you can talk with others that live in your household. You want to engage with them and have that conversation about how they see using the space and what they're comfortable having in the room. I mean, I would say maybe if you've got really little kids, don't ask them because I know if I had asked my kids when they were really, really little, I mean, even now, if I were to ask them, I'm sure I would get some pretty interesting answers. They might for sure ask that a TV is in the room. They would probably ask for maybe a pillow for when they just randomly decide that they want to lie down mid-meal. They may ask for toys. That would for sure be on the top of their list. So I may not involve them so much in the conversation at this point, but certainly, if you've got adults in the household or older kids that you can have that conversation with them and get them to weigh in when you're making those decisions, because it's really important to have like a collective discussion around how a room functions and how it's designed so that everyone feels like their ideas and their thoughts have been considered, and that I think it gets everyone involved as well, especially if you're somebody who wants everyone to be involved in the cooking process and the cleanup process and setting the table and, refilling the drinks or whatever it may be. If you get them involved in how it looks and where things live, then it becomes much easier for somebody to feel good in the space and to get involved because they've had a say in how it functions, right? And I think it's so important to think, how can we bring health? How can we bring connection, beauty, experience? How can we create something that's really special, that speaks to a lifestyle we want to emphasize or create? And you can really borrow styles and rituals from all over the world. Just because you live in a certain country doesn't mean you have to set your table up the way that most people do. You can change it up. Have you ever traveled somewhere and came home and just felt really inspired to continue something from your travels? Like, say you went to Spain and you just want to keep doing, café con leche, or you want to stock your pantry with new spices, or dine al fresco, eat late and enjoy like a Mediterranean sobremesa, which is just the act of lingering at the table, or an aperitivo, which is that pre-dinner drink, right? Like, we often feel really inspired by other countries. I think about the times that I've traveled places and come home and allowed that inspiration and influence to impact how I do things. And it's amazing how many people will go travel somewhere and come back and want to continue a little something special. And I love that, because it just goes to show that when we have experiences, when we have this sort of shift from our everyday life and we're able to see something that's done a little bit different, we're impacted by it. And we get to look at what we do and think, I'd like to tweak that a little bit. Or I really found that I felt very relaxed, or I felt really good when I was doing this or that. So I want to try that when I get home. Okay, so let's talk quickly about just the design of a dining room. So no matter where in the world you're listening, there are fundamentals that we all share. And this is ergonomics, okay? It's based on anthropometric data, which is basically just the measurements of the human body. And this data is used in architectural handbooks all over the world. So there are, of course, some variations to it, depending on where you live, and in this case, how you eat, right? Obviously, if you are eating lower to the ground, there's going to be different standard dimensions than if you are eating higher up. So, but basically, this is the measurements sort of tell us how much space you need to do things like walk behind someone who's sitting at a table, how much room you need, elbow room, while you're sitting in your chair. So if somebody's sitting next to you, you don't feel crammed or uncomfortable, and nor do they. Your place setting space, so how much actual space you need on the table itself for all of the dishes and the things. Again, this changes slightly depending on the style of eating. Other things like how many chairs to fit around different table sizes and the layout of the room, what feels the best for how you move in a space. But there are so many subtle details in a dining room. The details really can be endless. And I love it because it just means you have more opportunity to really be specific in how you want it to look and how you want to feel when you're in the space. So things like texture, textures tell us whether the room is inviting, whether it's comforting and calm, if it's a really smooth feel to the space, reflected surfaces that can lend itself to more formality. And I love the idea of in a dining room, especially now where we have a lot more open plan and people don't have so much of a formal dining space. They might have one area that they have a dining table that they use for breakfast. They use it for Christmas dinners. They use it for daily dinners. Sometimes it's really formal. Sometimes it's really informal. And this is a wonderful way to be able to switch it up. So if you look at your dining table itself, is there a way to elevate it when you want to do a more formal setting? So let's say you have a more formal table that's really, smooth and refined looking, but you only use it as a formal table every so often. Well, you could consider putting table linens on it, maybe use a linen, a textural, nubbly linen that looks really relaxed and crinkled for your day-to-day use. When you're in the process of designing your dining room, when you're creating that inspiration board, if you've determined what you value, then there are certain things that you'll choose as a result of your values. So things like table size, for how many guests you want or are comfortable with, the styles of lighting, for instance, if you want a really relaxed space, maybe you're going to choose something a little more airy and a little more informal. How does the light cast, right? Is it a halo light and you can see it on the ceiling? Does it create an ambiance? The whole fixture just is illuminated? Or is it a downlight where it's just sort of focused light on the space? You want to think details. And I think often you might think, well, no one really notices the details. It's not a big deal. But really, it's the details that make the design. You may not say, I noticed that specifically, or I noticed that specifically, but collectively, you do see it. Your brain, your body are responding to your space, whether you are noticing it, whether it's on the forefront of your mind or not. So if you can imagine in your dining room where you strip back everything, envision your space as just an empty space. There's nothing in it. And then look at the architectural elements, look at the windows, look at the doors. What are the size of them? What is the placement of them? And then you start to fill the space. So the next thing you'd want to add is your table. Where is that sitting in the room? Is it off-centered in the space? Therefore, do you need to balance that on the other side of the room with another piece of furniture or perhaps a large piece of art on the wall? So you're just playing with that balance. Where is your light fixture? Is it going to be a focal point in the room? Do you want it to have impact in the space? And then you start layering everything else in based on balance, based on scale. and impact, visual impact. Also, the colors of the space. If you don't have a formal dining room, then it's open to the rest of your home. You have to think about the flow from the other rooms. You also have to think about how those colors shift and change. If it's something that you're using in the evening because you're sitting down and eating, that color is going to shift in the evening, and it's going to read differently than it would in the morning at breakfast. So you have to think of those sorts of things. And if it is a closed space and you do have a formal dining room, then you can actually make it quite dramatic and have fun with it. But again, it has to be what are your values? What are you trying to achieve with that? I think it's a really neat thing to think you can design your own table style. If you crave slow conversations and calm rituals, or you want something more energized and interesting, how can you really design your own style at the table to get the results that you want? Okay, so now let's look at different countries, and we're going to talk about kind of some food patterns and their etiquette, some interior style. So we'll start with Spain. The food patterns in Spain are, late night dinners and tapas and just multiple sort of small dishes. In Spain, they use a lot of olive oil, which I love, but it's the more Mediterranean diet, right? It's the seafood and the fresh vegetables. For etiquette in Spain, they love their long lunches, and meals are really looked at as social events, right? They have something called sobremesa, which is lingering after a meal. They love to chat for a while after the meal. If you're eating at a restaurant, you can sit and eat and linger and chat without anyone coming and telling you have to leave. Like in North America, it's so funny because if we go to a restaurant and we're spending too long at the table, we'll often get the sense that they want us to leave. They need the table. They need to seat another group or whatever. But yes, not in Spain. They really love the sobremesa, and their interior style. Well, they're not afraid of color. In Spain, color and pattern and shape is they're just not afraid to use that. And they use that in different ways. I think there's the more sort of like rustic style of Spain with the wood tables and the wrought iron details and the tiled floors and outdoor courtyards and all of that. But there's also a refined style as well. And I think in any country, there are different design styles. If you look at interior designers from different countries, there's variation. But in Spain in general, I would say they're not afraid of color, not afraid of pattern. And I love that. They love their long meals, their moments. Yeah, which is great because long meals, when you extend your meal time and you get to socialize and enjoy time with people, just that connection. There's dopamine and oxytocin release and all of those things. It really reduces stress when you do enjoy those long meals and connection with people. So yeah, if you want to try something from Spain, try lingering after your meal and not rushing to clean the plates away and to do those things, but just to sit and enjoy, pour another drink or a cup of coffee after dinner and just enjoy the moment. And then in Japan, they have a ritual. They have washoku, which is a social practice, and it just emphasizes local, fresh ingredients. It emphasizes a balanced meal. So balanced in terms of taste, in terms of visual, how the meal looks. So for taste, sweet, salty, sour, bitter, you're going to have all of these on the plate. So things like rice and fish and vegetables and fermented foods. And then in Japan, their etiquettes, respect for presentation, and they appreciate a bit more of a quiet dining experience and manners and a sense of calm. I would say that in Japan, the way they present their food and the way that they eat their food is very calm. And their dinnerware is very minimalist. It's not a lot of things. It's not ornamental. It's not pretty. It's just simplistic and very functional in a lot of ways. But I find it looks really beautiful. And, their interior style, they have the low tables, often floor seating. So it's very common. Natural woods, tatami mats. And again, it's very simplistic. It's pared down and very functional, but there's a beauty to that simplicity that I think makes it really interesting. They love their rituals and their smaller bites. They're slow eating, which is really great for digestion and overall health. So yeah, if you want to try something from Japan, visual calmness, simplicity, and just respect for balance in not only meals, but in aesthetics. So the food on your plate, so the taste to how the space looks. And then in France, they enjoy 3 to 4 courses. They love their cheese and their wine and their desserts. And lunch is still a really important meal. Their etiquette is, finish what's on your plate. You don't leave food. And something I read, which I thought was interesting, is you don't show up early. If you're invited somewhere or if you're having guests over, if you're having guests, you can expect that they will not show up right on time. And if you're going somewhere, you shouldn't show up right on time. So I don't know, I read that it's like a 10 or 15 minutes is expected. Anyway, I sort of thought that was funny. I actually like that personally because I find early is not my thing. And then for their interior style, I would say their style is definitely more formal. They love to mix the past with the present, long tables, upholstered chairs. French style always has a touch of romantic flair to it. It always feels, I would say, a little more perhaps on the pretty side. But again, like in any country, there are different styles. So you might find more modern or more traditional, but I would say it's consistent that there's a respect for mixing the past with the present, and story is an important. So you could try, if you want to, incorporate something from France, try choosing one evening a week or one evening a month where you set your table up in a really formal way and you enjoy sitting down at the table and dressing up and making it a bit of an experience. In India, their food patterns, they have thali style meals, which is basically multiple small dishes. It's sort of similar to Japan with washoku in the way that there's balance and there's variety in terms of nutrients. So they have like grains and lentils and vegetables. Presentation is important as well. So the dishes are all served together in small portions. There's rich use of spices and there's like vegetarian diversity. And then their etiquette is they often will eat with their right hand, very family style serving. And it's also, I read, important to arrive a little late as well. It can be considered to be polite. And their interior style is bright colors, patterned textiles, low or cross-legged seating, that relaxed posture, which actually can help with digestion. And I read that actually eating with your hands can potentially lead to more mindful eating because it's a more sensory experience. You have like heightened tactile experience. So if you're trying something from India, you could try serving a meal in smaller bowls on one large platter to sort of recreate that variety and abundance feel, the thali style meal. And then in Scandinavia, the food patterns, very seasonal, local, simple, fish, veg, open-faced sandwiches. They like to eat their dinners a little bit earlier. I read that dinners are between 4 and 6. And then with etiquette, it's a little more informal at times, and everyone helps serve and clear. So if you're a guest at someone's house, you would want to offer to help clear the plates and to clean up. But one of the things I love is that everyone gets involved. So in a household, everyone sort of shares the cooking and is also involved in meal planning. And I think that's an amazing thing. And also in Scandinavia, punctuality is important. So you don't want to be late if you're a guest. And then the interior style is very light-filled. Hygge is really important. It's a way of life. So candles and scents and just light and bright simplicity, pale woods, and very uncluttered. And we know that natural light and a really clean, minimalistic style can actually reduce stress. And obviously with natural light, it will boost your circadian rhythms. And so if you want to try something, you could eat dinner really early and set the tone with some candles or really natural lighting. And if you wanted to take one thing, you could take getting everyone involved in the meal planning and the cleaning and the prep. So as we wrap up today's episode, I just want to leave you with a quote by Virginia Woolf. One cannot think well, love well, sleep well if one has not dined well. So as we wrap up, here's my invitation. Think about the way you currently dine. Do you eat quickly at the kitchen island? Do you linger in a formal dining room you only use on holidays? Or maybe your table has become the family catch-all. Now, imagine redesigning that moment. Maybe you bring in Spain's tradition of sobremesa and commit to 15 minutes of lingering conversation after dinner. Maybe you borrow Japan's idea of ritual. Maybe you choose France's formality and set the table beautifully, even on a weeknight. Or perhaps you create a bright Scandinavian-inspired nook where meals feel casual, airy, and connected to nature. There's no one right way. The magic is in creating your own blend, one that matches your lifestyle, your values, and the kind of energy you want to bring into your home. Because when you design your table, you design your dining room, you're not just styling a room, you're shaping your health, your happiness, and the connections that happen there. If this episode got you thinking differently about your dining space, share it with a friend or family member, and let's start a bigger conversation about how our homes can support better living. And if you want more ideas, tips, and resources, head over to Paro's website. That's yourparo.com. yourparo.com. Or check the show notes for links. Thanks for listening to Your Home by Design. Until next time, create space and let your table tell the story of the life you want to live. Thanks so much for listening today. If you found this episode helpful, the best way to support the show is to follow along and share it with someone who'd love it too. And if you'd like to go a step further, you can become one of our Better Living backers. It's a small monthly contribution that helps keep the show going. And as a thank you, I'll send you a personal note along with a 15% discount for the Create Space course when it launches. You can find the Support the Show link right in the show notes. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for creating space with me.